King Charles signed a document that had the potential to permanently alter the monarchy behind a sealed door at Buckingham Palace. The covert document did more than just highlight Catherine's potential significance. It ordered Camilla to be removed from the long-term governing framework of the monarchy and legally recognized her as the lady who would eventually succeed William in the throne. No one in the room cheered as Charles finally lowered the pen. They realized that they had just ended one royal future in order to secure another. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates before we delve further into what this actually implies for the royal family. As the room fell silent, Charles kept his hand next to the pen. His personal secretary observed. The advisor on constitutional law waited. The Crown Continuity Instrument, a private agreement outlining the transfer of power, home management, ceremonial influence, and public leadership to the following reign, was signed by the king. He had neither abdicated the monarchy nor given William and Catherine instant authority, because it was not an abdication proclamation. However, it had a huge impact. It eliminated Camilla from future succession planning, strategic royal councils, and long-term crown representation, and confirmed Catherine as the future queen alongside the prince. After reading Camilla's name once more, the monarch touched the page with his thumb. He questioned, "Is there no other way?" The advisor argued that a delay would split the monarchy between two centers of power, even though he knew the solution. William required assurance. Catherine needed time to get ready. But Camilla would forfeit the future status she thought her years of service had won. The choice hurt the woman who had stuck with him through rejection and eventual acceptance, but it safeguarded his son and daughter-in-law, so Charles clenched his jaw. The decree was strengthened with a sealed appendix. An official documents annex is an extra part that contains information that isn't included in the main text. This one gave Catherine control over strategy, charitable giving, youth involvement, and ceremonial reform. She would assist in determining how the next reign interacted with the people, spoke, and used. A second provision dismantled a network that was supposed to endure the transition by preventing Camilla's family and advisors from continuing to have influence after Charles's rule. A royal assistant lifted 2 wrapped letters and departed through hallways a few minutes later. Carrying duty and overwhelming obligation, one approached William and Catherine. The other approached Camilla with evidence that the man she most trusted had blocked her future. However, the paper forced the palace to face the conflicting views, old wounds, and personal allegiances concealed behind their carefully manicured public personas before either woman could comprehend what Charles had done. The sealed package stood for a future Catherine had spent years planning for, but had never had the courage to pursue. It symbolized something even more cruel to Camilla. The chance that while she stood within the palace, history was getting ready to pass her. Suddenly, 2 women who had different royal purposes, reputations, and generations were tied to the same text. One was being carried up to the crown. The other's future was being cut off. At Adelaide Cottage, Catherine opened the envelope next to William, but she froze when she saw the first page. Her family stability, self-control, discipline, and years of public trust had all contributed to her increasing power. She had never viewed becoming queen as a reward that needed to be earned. She regarded it as a responsibility that would require her to give up her marriage, her kids, and every aspect of her personal life. That's why it didn't make me smile to hear that she would be a key female figure in the monarchy. The Crown Continuity Instrument, a secret document outlining the transfer of royal power to the following reign, gave a great deal of power while limiting Camilla's potential effect. Before she put the sheets on the table, William observed her read the text again. "Someone is about to be deeply hurt." Catherine stepped away from him and muttered, "Someone is about to be deeply hurt." The prince followed, carefully selecting his words. The document was not a prize, he informed her. It served as defense for the organization, their offspring, and a future government that would not be able to endure conflicting allegiances. Visibly shaken, she went back to him and responded that when protection was based on the death of another person, it might still feel cruel. Her triumph had come alongside the sorrow of another woman, so he could understand the weight of what she was saying. Then the future king revealed something he had concealed from her. A taped palace conversation that was kept for the succession files revealed that weeks prior, Charles had given him a private consultation. William had cautioned his father that the next reign could not function under two rival centers of female authority, even if he had not signed the proclamation. As she gazed at him, Catherine realized that the choice had been taking shape long before the envelope arrived at their house. He said that he had argued for clarity rather than shame, but all of a sudden, the distinction felt incredibly thin. Camilla read her copy by herself after receiving it at Clarence's house. She thought her position next to Charles was finally safe after decades of controversy, rejection, and gradual acceptance. More than her influence was at risk from the document. It jeopardized the significance she had given each challenging year she had lived through. When she reached the removal clause, she shoved her chair back so sharply that it struck the wall. The Queen Consort immediately let her private secretary in, folded the pages, and gave him an unexplained order to depart. The door closed, and Camilla opened the document once more. She discovered that a handwritten notation was required next to the sealed annex. Her expression quickly altered after Windsor. She was aware that the decree had not appeared out of nowhere, and that those phrases alluded to a private moment that the palace had purposefully concealed. The remarks made after Windsor alluded to the private altercation that transformed years of subdued animosity into a constitutional crisis that Charles was unable to overlook. The document had not shown up out of the blue. Its actual beginnings occurred during a ceremony intended to show royal unity inside Windsor Castle. An argument about Catherine's future role turned into something much more serious behind closed doors, a clear challenge to Charles's succession plans and William's authority. The mood was entirely altered by a single statement made when there were no cameras. Those who heard it would subsequently characterize it as Charles's realization that love could no longer subjugate the monarchy. For months, tension had been rising. After William eventually inherited the throne, Camilla anticipated that her household, reliable advisors, and ceremonial inclinations would continue to have an impact. The prince had completely different desires. A smaller monarchy centered on his immediate family, with more distinct authority, fewer opposing voices, and firm control. Uncertainty might split staff allegiances and erode public trust before the incoming king had even assumed power. So that transition, that is, the planned transfer of responsibilities from one royal reign to the next, was crucial. Additionally, Catherine had started going to high-level talks regarding royal communications, youth involvement, patronage reform, and public trust. Her expanding role was not decorative. During challenging times, Charles depended more and more on her capacity to establish a connection with younger families and stabilize the institution. Camilla had a different perspective on that access. She feared that while she was still standing next to the king, the palace was covertly constructing a parallel court around the Wales family, a different hub of advisors and power that could eclipse her. During the planning meeting for the Windsor Commonwealth reception, everything went wrong. The purpose of the meeting was to plan a significant event that would include delegates from Commonwealth countries, the voluntary union of nations connected by cooperation and common history. The Queen Consort objected to Catherine's appointment as chair of the Future Strategy Committee. She said the words that altered everything while Charles and William listened. "While I am here, this family cannot be led by two queens." Catherine refrained from arguing. Shutting her briefing folder, she addressed the monarch directly if her presence had become a hindrance. Charles paused. Even though his quiet was brief, it had a greater impact than an answer. She maintained her composure, but the pain was evident since the position she had taken on as a duty was now being viewed as an act of aspiration. William moved his chair back and informed Camilla that she had no right to limit Catherine's future power. The monarch raised one hand and demanded calm, but the prince refused to sit until his wife's place was acknowledged. She reiterated her desire for no conflict. However, he maintained that the issue had already transcended sentiments. Camilla pushed Charles to postpone giving the Wales household strategic responsibilities once Catherine departed. During the recorded meeting, She cautioned that William was going too fast and that his wife's fame may overwhelm the sovereign before the reign was finished. The king didn't say much, but later that night, he asked for the private succession documents and wrote on the Windsor record, "Continuity requires clarity." Within 48 hours, constitutional advisors started writing the instrument that would eliminate her from the future structure of the monarchy. However, Camilla refused to allow the verdict to remain without facing Charles, directly after learning that one angry statement at Windsor had served as the basis for her dismissal. Camilla didn't call her relatives, call advisors, or give the home instructions. After carrying the folded document to Charles, she shut the library door. There were no more aids. The language could not be softened by any courtiers. The husband and wife stood by themselves with the truth between them for the first time since the decree was written. After setting the pages on the table, Camilla posed the query that Charles was most afraid of. Had he just picked Catherine above her, or had he defended the throne? Hours before, Charles had dismissed his employees and was reviewing state documents in Clarence House's private library. The decision could no longer be concealed behind palace protocol, as evidenced by the signed document that lay open between them with its broken seal. A ruling monarch's spouse is known as a royal consort, but this title does not ensure power after the reign is over. Camilla was fully aware of the distinction. Her status as the king's wife was not instantly terminated by the decree. However, it stated that when his rule ended, her power would cease. In William's future home, her voice would not be guaranteed. Camilla accused the monarch of letting William and Catherine determine how history would remember her after dropping the pages onto the table. She insisted on knowing if one encounter at Windsor could really erase decades spent with him. Charles stood up slowly, controlling his voice. He informed her that he was the only one who could make the decision. No constitutional provision had mandated the result, and no advisor had coerced him. Rival courts, conflicting allegiances, and an unresolved dispute over Catherine's authority prevented the monarch from assuming another reign. At that time, the Queen Consort gave him a different look. She had anticipated that he would place the responsibility on the prince's pressure, legal warnings, or officials. Rather, the king took full responsibility for the ruling. The fact that her husband had looked over the price and signed nonetheless made that candor more compelling than any justification. In a private home examination, Charles then disclosed that Windsor had been the last trigger rather than the sole cause. According to the documented evaluation, Camilla's circle members were delaying the transfer of patronages to Catherine. Advisors were vying for authority, and personnel were given contradictory orders. Influence and public awareness are shaped by royals' power over patronages, which are official connections that they use to fund public organizations and charities. Before William's reign had started, the monarch cautioned that letting two households compete for those positions would weaken him. Camilla inquired as to whether Catherine had called for her dismissal. Charles immediately responded. She had made no requests. The future queen had even begged him to protect Camilla's dignity and avoid needless humiliation in a recorded private conversation. The wounded partner, who yearned for an enemy, was denied that truth. Camilla carefully took off her wedding band and set it next to the decree. They were silent for a while before she put it back on. Then she informed Charles that he needed to justify his decision to William if he had prioritized the institution over her future. Charles had put up with Camilla's rage, but the most difficult test was ahead of him in a smaller room at Windsor, where father and son would determine whether the decree signified unity or the ultimate breakdown of generational trust. A sad reality was revealed by the confrontation. Camilla had emotional strength, closeness, and influence. However, the sovereign had always held the power to choose the future of the monarchy. Only Charles had the authority to sign the document that established the succession plan. Even though he could listen to his wife, oppose his son, or postpone Catherine's ascent, he now had to confront William and explain his use of that power. Whether the edict was written for a father's guilt or for the crown would become clear from the conversation. With the signed document sandwiched between two seats, Charles waited in his own sitting room at Windsor. As sovereign, he was in charge of ceremonial precedence, strategic councils, household appointments, transition preparation, and the private advice prepared for the following monarch. A potent symbol of status, ceremonial precedence is the official order that determines where royals stand, sit, and appear during official tasks. Additionally, the crown continuity instrument was made to withstand human pressure. Copies were kept in the private office of the sovereign and the transition secretariat, a tiny team that was planning a smooth transition between reigns so that no family reconciliation could subtly undermine it. Before William appeared, the king took off his glasses, massaged his eyes, and practiced his opening line twice. He was more afraid of his son's judgment than of constitutional resistance. The prince ignored the document and took a seat. He explained to his father that he had never requested Camilla's humiliation. Rather than exacting revenge on the woman Charles loved, he wanted assurance for Catherine. In response, the monarch said that uncertainty had turned into a threat. With each delay, rival advisors were able to solidify their positions. Staff allegiances were divided, was questioned, and Catherine's future power was called into doubt before she had even assumed it. William forced him to tell the whole truth. Then, in their recorded private chat, Charles disclosed that he had given Catherine more authority without first consulting him. People trusted her stability, according to data on public confidence. According to household estimates, she is the most effective link between newer generations and tradition. She was also determined to be crucial to the stability of the following reign through formal talks with members of the International Association of Nations, associated with the monarchy and Commonwealth meetings. The future monarch had anticipated protection for his spouse, but not so extensive power. Charles looked into the provisions pertaining to Camilla. Her home, financial stability, humanitarian endeavors, ceremonial respect, and lifelong dignity were all protected by the contract. She would not be removed from the annals of his rule or publicly humiliated. However, those safeguards were purposefully kept apart from institutional authority, allowing her to maintain personal dignity while losing control over strategy and appointments. At last, William confirmed that he had read the instrument by lifting the receipt. He didn't celebrate when he signed it. The king accepted the scolding without defending himself when the prince stated that Catherine would bear the responsibility rather than enjoy a win. As his kid got to the door, Charles stopped him. He cautioned that a member of Camilla's household had copied a portion of the order, and palace security thought the page might already be out of royal hands. William turned around, seeing that the family's private dispute was going to develop into a public scandal. In private, the palace could deal with sadness. However, every personal injury was on the verge of becoming a national spectacle once pieces of the edict got into the hands of the media. Even though there were only 11 words in the initial leak, they were plenty to rock the palace. Following the handover, the future queen will have complete authority. Editors demanded proof within minutes. Staff members started looking for the lost copy, while royal journalists called every contact they had. The organization that had been in charge of the secret for weeks abruptly lost control of the narrative. Camilla realized that her private removal was turning into public history when she heard a television host mention Catherine's name upstairs. A picture of a single paragraph was sent to a national broadcaster via an encrypted message that concealed the sender's identity. Although the title of the document had been concealed, dismissal was nearly impossible because of the royal seal, Charles's handwritten initials, and the mention of the future queen. Buckingham Palace went into crisis mode right away. 3 answers were written by communications officials. Deny everything, acknowledge just transition plans, or acknowledge the existence of the instrument without elaborating on its implications for Camilla. The confidential procedure used to prepare royal responsibilities and power for the upcoming reign is known as transition planning. However, this song leak demonstrated that the process had turned into a struggle for control of that future. While the shattering news persisted, Camilla sat by herself. The queen consort grabbed for the remote and stopped when the presenter referred to Catherine as the unquestionable future female leader of the kingdom. A part of her needed to hear how swiftly the nation was embracing them, therefore she was unable to stop the remarks. Her personal worry became public knowledge with each sentence. As millions of people watched, the power she had battled to gain was vanishing, and her silence provided no protection. While assisting Prince Louis with his study, Catherine learned the news. Her phone kept vibrating until she moved stealthily into the hallway and gave William a call. The boy turned to face the door, then went back to his job, feeling that something was different. She informed the prince that she would not permit her promotion to be seen as a triumph over another female. William concurred, but cautioned that the palace would lose control over how people apportioned blame and sympathy once the story became public. The photographed page was linked by security personnel to a copier that one of Camilla's senior home assistants was using. The assistant claimed in a taped internal interview that the copy had simply been prepared in order to get legal counsel. However, the Times sent a more sinister message. It's possible that the leak was intended to scare Charles into retreating before the instrument was made public. Charles would not budge. The king rejected a proposal to reverse the edict and ignored a written rejection that was presented to him by authorities. Retreat, he claimed, would make the future throne seem malleable and encourage all the injured factions to contest William's power. All optimism that the verdict could still be overturned was dashed by his response. Then Catherine asked for something unexpected. She requested to meet Camilla without the presence of William, Charles, secretaries, or attorneys. Both women were advised against it, but the injured consort agreed. As the palace bellowed directives all around them, Catherine and Camilla opted for privacy, silence, and one last meeting that would decide whether the edict ended in dignity or resentment. No notes were taken by private secretaries. There were no husbands in the area. Nothing in the Constitution could conceal what had taken place. Camilla was waiting next to an unused tray of tea when Catherine entered the tiny garden room at Clarence's residence. Neither woman talked for a few seconds. One had been dubbed the future of the monarchy. The other had been informed that she would no longer have a position in that future. However, Catherine's first sentence, rather than an accusation, was the pivotal moment. "I didn't come here to steal anything from you." Catherine had purposefully selected the little space. They would have been surrounded by rank, succession, and reminders of who was rising and who was being pushed aside in a formal palace chamber. The intended process by which the crown and its duties are transferred to the following king is known as succession. However, regulations were no longer the focus of this conference. Both women were aware that the order could not be reversed without undermining Charles and giving the impression that William's ultimate power was negotiable. They weren't there to haggle over authority. They were there to determine whether they could withstand its effects without harming one another. At last, Camilla inquired as to whether Catherine was relieved. She anticipated prudence, possibly even rejection. However, the future queen was very honest in her response. The text had transformed a far-off obligation into a certain fate. It had linked Camilla's public defeat to her ascension and put the burden of the next reign squarely on her. Instead of feeling triumphant, she felt scared. After thoroughly examining her, the queen consort realized that the woman in front of her did not view the decree as a victory. Then, in their private, unrecorded chat, Camilla acknowledged that her fury had never been limited to power. After Charles's reign, she had thought that maintaining her influence would demonstrate her acceptance. Future influence appeared to be the last resort for those who had never forgiven her, and years of debate had followed her into every meeting. She was afraid that losing that location would turn her life into controversy once more. Catherine disclosed that she had requested Charles in secret to preserve Camilla's position within his reign, her humanitarian endeavors, and her dignity. Additionally, she had asked the palace to refrain from using terms like punishment, defeat, and banishment in any announcements. Firm boundaries were what the future queen desired, but she refused to establish them by humiliation. Before admitting the truth about Windsor, Camilla lowered her gaze. She acknowledged that she had gone too far by confronting Catherine in front of William and the staff. She apologized for making another woman bear that anxiety as if it were her responsibility, but she did not apologize for her fear of being irrelevant. Catherine did not pretend the harm had disappeared as she accepted the words. Camilla gave Catherine a folded handwritten message, acknowledging the impending change before she departed. Before the palace addressed the nation, she requested that she put it straight into Charles's hands. Charles gained something from their meeting, but Camilla's authority was not restored. Without eliminating the individuals left behind, the edict by itself could never pave the way for proclaiming the new future. By dawn, the palace had lost ownership of the secret document. It belonged to crowded pavements, television studios, breakfast tables, and millions of people attempting to comprehend the king's actions. For some, Catherine's promotion signaled the start of a more powerful monarchy. Camilla's dismissal was perceived by some as a cruel verdict. However, one picture outside Buckingham Palace was more effective than any discussion in capturing the spirit of the nation. Standing peacefully next to each other, two women held images of two distinct queens. At last, Buckingham Palace released the statement that the nation had been waiting for, a long-term continuity framework outlining the duties of the succeeding king and queen had been agreed by Charles. An official plan outlining the transfer of responsibilities, power, and leadership to a subsequent reign is called a continuity framework. Although the term removal was avoided in the wording, the connotation was clear. During the current reign, Camilla would maintain her dignity. However, she would not automatically be in charge of William's future home. Divided authority might weaken the prince before he took the throne and make Catherine start her reign under continual pressure. Therefore, the choice was crucial. It was described by broadcasters as the most obvious royal transition move since Charles ascended to the throne. Analysts concentrated on the monarch's resolve to avoid rival courts, Catherine's increased responsibilities, and Camilla's diminishing power. A different group of advisors and allegiances working against the official royal household is referred to as a competing court. A private family dispute was no longer being discussed throughout the nation. It was witnessing the boundaries of one age being established by another. William, together with Catherine and their kids, followed the announcement. She found it difficult to control her emotions when the presenter referred to her as the woman who was once entrusted with the next chapter of the monarchy. The future queen had spent years preparing for her role, but she had never meant the suffering of another woman to be the celebration of that preparation. Without saying anything, the prince took her hand. Pride, snorts, dread, and the realization that their private lives had just gotten closer to the throne were all evident in his silence. The palace paraphrased her handwritten acceptance, and Camilla listened by herself. She didn't look away even though she closed her eyes. For the first time, the queen consort heard her surrender offered as a contribution to stability rather than as a sign of defeat. Her future power could not be restored by the words. However, they kept her from turning into the public foe of Catherine's ascent. A crowd gathered under umbrellas outside Buckingham Palace, and the London Chronicle captured the national shock with a full-width picture of Charles's pen with the headline, "The King chooses the future." Catherine's picture was in the hands of one woman. Camilla's was in another. They demonstrated that public sentiment encompasses both empathy and enthusiasm by standing together. One verified line from the framework was then read by a broadcaster. The future reign must start with faith in as its queen, unity of command, and clarity of mission. Catherine's power was established. Charles called William, Catherine, and Camilla together for one last private meeting that night. Britain had already determined that a new era had begun for the monarchy. However, Charles still had to explain the significance of the signature to the three individuals whose lives it had permanently altered inside the palace doors. There were no cameras, no advisors, and no unsigned documents during the last meeting. Charles sat across from William, Catherine, and Camilla, aware that the future of the monarchy had been ensured at great personal expense. Without restarting the conflict, he was unable to restore Camilla's lost power. He couldn't reduce Catherine's influence without making the following reign weaker. He was limited to speaking truthfully. Selecting which woman was important had never been the goal of the covert paper. It involved determining the end of one reign and the start of a new one. Charles assured them that the Crown Continuity Instrument would continue to be in effect indefinitely. The formal document, outlining the transfer of power and royal duties to the following reign, served as the instrument. Alongside William, Catherine would ascend to the throne and have complete authority over the public mission, strategic direction, and modernizing agenda of the future household. This clarity was important. The king continued, because the future monarch could not start his reign while different advisors fought for power or questioned his wife's authority. Camilla heard the monarch reaffirm what she would keep: her dwelling, security, philanthropic affiliations, dignity, and acknowledgement for her service under his rule would all be safeguarded. However, after William ascended to the throne, she would not be in charge of appointments, policies, patronage transfers, or domestic matters. The official transfer of a royal link to a charity or organization from one member of the family to another is known as a patronage transfer. Public influence was shaped by these roles, and dividing them would perpetuate the old strife. In the private recorded account created for the Royal Archive, Charles turned to face his wife and said that signing the decree had deeply hurt him. He explained to her that love could not necessitate the monarchy's continued structural instability. Camilla said that she understood, but that didn't make the loss any less painful. She eventually acknowledged that their marriage had not been rejected by the decree, thus her voice stayed composed. It had established a limit on her power. Then Catherine vowed that Camilla's humiliation would not serve as the foundation for her future as queen. She would thank the queen consort for her efforts during Charles's reign. Camilla turned to face her and accepted the pledge while honoring the boundaries set by the contract. William took the signed document out of its folder and silently read the last paragraph, understanding that recollection was not the same as control, but it was also not erasing. Rather than retaining it, the prince gave it back to his father. After sealing and closing the folder, Charles put it into the transition box, a secure receptacle that contained the following reign's instructions. That small gesture put an end to the dispute. Catherine would determine the course of the monarchy, but Camilla would continue to play a role in its history. The weight of the future was taken on by one lady. The other acknowledged that the boundaries of her royal chapter had been reached. Charles had opted for continuity over conflicting allegiances, succession over rivalry, and clarity over sentiment. Following the conclusion of the meeting, Catherine moved forward to assume responsibility for the upcoming reign. Charles stayed beside the sealed paper, knowing that the crown had survived because he had finally chosen a clear destiny, while Camilla retreated with her dignity intact. I appreciate you watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the future.